All right, my name is Jeff Steiner. I'm the Executive Director of the Dad's Resource Center. I have with me here today Mike Taylor, who is the founder and editor of the Dad Well Done website. Mike had outreach to the Dad's Resource Center. He has some really great statistical, a compilation of some statistics about fatherhood. And he asked if we'd be interested in using that. And that was really, it's good data. It's something I think we'll be able to put to use. But then when I looked at his website, I was just absolutely blown away. It is just extremely well done website from a design perspective. And there's just some really, really great content there. And so I reached out to Mike and I asked him, I said, hey, would you like to have a conversation with me? And he was like, sure, absolutely. I'd like to throw it back out to you, Mike, and just have you introduce yourself and talk about how you came about the idea of, and then being able to put together the Dad Well Done website.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing. And yeah, anytime I get to be on a conversation about fatherhood and advancing that in America, it's something that's so needed. I'm honored to be a part of it. So Dad Well Done was an idea that came about, gosh, 6 months or a year ago. I was talking to my wife, and we have 4 kids. So I have an 8-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter. I have an 18-month-old son, and then a 6-month-old daughter. The trouble with ages is they keep moving, right? So it's hard to keep up with.
I have 2 and I can't keep track of it. I got to stop to think, and they're 2 years apart. So I can't imagine double having to do that.
Yeah. So being a young dad, the last 8 years, I guess 9 years, because when you first figure out that your wife is pregnant, you start becoming a dad in your mind. And so it's kind of been a struggle trying to figure out, how do I do this thing? How do I do it the right way? And I've seen it done the wrong way a lot. And of course, there are tons of statistics, which we'll get into, about what that will do. But I just really wanted to do it differently. And so I leaned into my church and some mentors that they weren't mentors at the time. I asked them to be my mentors. I really just started asking people, what does this look like? What did you learn? What did not go well for you? What went well? So I really pushed in really hard for the first, few years of my oldest son's life, and made a lot of mistakes, and I'm still making mistakes, but I'm learning. And I just thought, and I did grow up with a very good father. And there were some things that he did great at. There were some things I wish he would have done better. But all in all, I had a world-class father. And I know that's not most people's experience. And so when I started talking to people, I realized a lot of people were broken from not having a father, or their father was there but was emotionally absent. And most of the problems that adult males, definitely adult females, deal with, are from an absent father, or from a father who harmed them in some way because of something they said or something they didn't say. So I just decided I wanted to change that with my kids. And so I started talking to my wife about this. I was like, I've always liked writing, and I've always written about specifically parenting and about faith and the intertwine there, but really just about being a good leader and a good father. And so she encouraged me. She was like, just do it. And I also had a background in building websites. So it all kind of came together, and my wife encouraged me, and I said, all right. And I always kind of scoffed at that. I was always like, that doesn't, who's going to read that, and who's going to pay attention? So I started it, and I just put all the stuff I had written into the website. And I'm very data driven. So when I sent you this graphic, I spent a long time going through the existing research about fathers. And I was very surprised to find that dads are a lot more eager to be good dads than people think they are. But they're also very, very, very hard on themselves. So those were the big takeaways. And that's why I reached out to you, and why I think the message I think people need to hear is like, fatherhood is a huge issue that is being overlooked in our nation right now. The fatherlessness, and then B, dads they're so hungry for this. They're so hungry to do it right. And so the work that you're doing, the work that other people in the space are doing, the National Fatherhood Initiative, people like that. I think it has the potential to change our nation on a foundational level. And so I really believe in that. So that's why I started the site. And if when you're trying to push a message out there, it can be very discouraging because you feel like no one's listening to this. But you just got to keep going and keep pushing this out there. And every now and then you get guys who are like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And so that's what fueled it. And that's what keeps me going doing it.
So that top line of your data includes that Pew Research, and I was familiar with that. But I had known before I saw that Pew Research, we're fatherhood is different now than what it was 30, 40 years ago, right?
Mhm.
30, 40 years ago, dad was at the country club or the bar after work, pulled his wallet out and said, "Here are my kids," right? That's what
Yeah.
fatherhood was. Not every, but by and large in the 50s, 60s. Nowadays, we're embracing it and we're immured in it and we're partners in it. And you see, if you go to school functions now, like the art show after school or whatever it may be, you have mothers with kids, you have fathers with kids, you have mothers and fathers with kids. You know what I mean? You see the equal
Yep.
portion taking kids to the doctors. At the grocery store, you see dads hiking the kids along with them when they go in the grocery store. So we're just in a different place now in this country with fatherhood on the part of fathers than we have been prior to now.
Yes, absolutely. And so you referenced the Pew Research study. Um, they talk about, the mom. So first of all, women have been moving into the workforce over the last 30 years, which is fantastic. But in doing so, they moved out of this primary role of like, no, you stay at home with the kid. You're the one that takes care of the kids. I'm the one that works. And then because all I do is work, now I have to like put a band-aid on the fact that that's all I feel like I'm doing, because I'm not connecting with my kids. And so I do go to the bar or the country club, and they become very disconnected because the mother is doing that. For my family, this happened. My wife went to work, and as she went to work, I started having to pick up some of the responsibilities. I have to go pick the kids up after school. The first 2 years of going to elementary school, I took them to school every morning, not because I wanted to be some super dad, but because my wife had to be at work before I did. So I feel like some of it was kind of a necessity, but then some of it too was, the younger generation, my generation, came into fatherhood seeing, first of all, every movie and TV show that's ever portrayed a dad as an idiot was not lost on us. Like, we don't want that. We don't want to be Homer Simpson. And growing up seeing that, and also seeing the impact of not having a dad present, generationally, that's just been, the cycle has been very powerful to see when you see the baby boomers, the life they lived. They were very wounded for the most part because their parents dealt with war and all the horrible things that came with that. The previous generation, the silent generation, which was the Great Depression, World War One, that whole era. Then the baby boomers dealt with their parents being very broken and disconnected, which was my dad's a baby boomer. And so he overcorrected and really wanted to be, he kind of babied our generation. So millennials always get a hard time for like, oh, they never, they want participation trophy. First of all, I never got a participation trophy. So I don't know where that came from. Maybe I'm from Alabama, so maybe they didn't give those out. But my dad overcorrected on that side, but never really taught me the harder, like how to be a man stuff. So generationally, you've got, the generation, the silent generation, which stayed at home, or which worked, and the women stayed at home, right? And then they kind of disconnected completely, and they were pretty much the disciplinary person. This is my dad's dad I'm referencing. So that generation. Then my dad, who's in the baby boomer generation, kind of swung to the other side of it and was still working all the time, but then kind of coddled me and my brothers and sisters. So now I think what's happening is the generation that we're in now of young parents is seeing, okay, we've seen what both of those extremes can do. Let's try to land somewhere in the middle. And so I'm trying to take the loving aspects that my dad gave me, and be present, but then also be stern and firm like my dad's dad was, but in a loving way. I think it's really cool because now fathers are starting, we have the media and we have all the data right in front of us to show us, oh my gosh, this is a problem, which previous generations didn't have. But B, we have the experiences to go, we've seen both sides of it. Now let's normalize. But yeah, I think it's fantastic that as women are getting more and more rights, are getting into the workplace more and more, it's having this impact where like dads are now being brought back into the raising of children in the way that maybe they wanted to before, but culturally it wasn't acceptable or whatever. And I think it's fantastic. I was looking at the data. So if you just think about, the graph, in the graphic, you've got, so the percentage, when you look at the percentage of the week spent on childcare, they're very similar now. Moms spend about 8%, dads spend about 5%. And so it's not what it used to be. Whereas moms would have been a lot higher, dads would have been a lot, well, maybe a little bit lower. But working out of the home, they're just, all the statistics are starting to levelize. And so the big theme here from the information that I've gathered is like, hey, when you look at all the stats across the board, dads and moms are like really close in their mindsets and how they do things. And so it's a pretty sweet spot to be able to, but like, I think dads now need to be equipped to do that. I think they're coming into it. Like the differentiations you see in the data is dads think they're doing a really bad job. They think they don't spend enough time with their kids, when in reality, they spend a very close amount of time as moms do. So dads aren't equipped to do this right now. And I think we're coming into, like I said, myself as a millennial dad, my dad didn't necessarily show me the discipline side. What does that look like in a healthy way? So dads are hungry for it, but they're hard on themselves, and we're leveling out in culture, which I think is a good thing.
So my story is I've never met my father.
Oh.
And I was born to a single mother. And that was in the 60s, 70s. And that was, again, that was a different time. But I've been somewhat successful in life because I have, resiliency, skills, talents, whatever it may be. But it was so much harder because I didn't have a father. Like I learned so many lessons the hard way. And one example is 11th grade, I ended up in the boys' locker room with a classmate of mine. He wasn't a bully, but he was a tough kid. He was one of those kids you knew if you got on his bad side, you'd be in trouble. And so
Mhm.
we ended up in urinals next to each other. And he looks over at me and he says, Jeff, if you don't step forward, I'm going to kick your butt. Right. And it took me
Mhm.
a second and I stepped forward and that was it. But it took my classmate, Eric Welsh, in 11th grade to teach me that when you're in a urinal next to someone, you need to step forward so you're not splashing them or keeping
Uh,
things private. Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what I've gone through in my life in so many
Mhm.
different ways. And that's something that we have girls, but if I would have had boys when they were 3 years old, I'm sure you've done this. Like you need to do this, right?
I hear
So
you.
that those are the challenges you face, like you said, when you don't have the father showing and teaching you these kinds of things. And you know, so like where you're coming from with it is holistically and broader
Mhm.
from a broader perspective. Of course, the Dad's Resource Center, we provide education resources and advocacy for single fathers struggling to be in the lives of their children. So,
Mhm.
of course, those fathers who aren't stepping up of their own volition, they need to. But there are so many different ways that the system impedes or denies
Mhm.
fathers access to their children. And, we've had just so many fathers, and it's heartbreaking from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing that can cut at the core of a man more than where they can't be there for their children and they're
Mhm.
powerless over it,
Yeah.
right? It is just absolutely soul crushing, and they are in an immense amount of personal and deep pain.
Yeah.
But they are just participants in a process where the victims are the children, right?
Yeah.
When a father isn't in lives, or is my experience, whatever occurred in that regard, but when the systems that are meant to protect, safeguard children deny them their access to their fathers, those
Mhm.
systems are deeply hurting their children. And so that's why the Dad's Resource Center exists. and why we're doing what we do.
Yeah, man, that is, so back to the data, it says uh only 60% of dads feel that their spouse fully supports their involvement, as opposed to 83% of moms feel that way. So I mean, just over half
Yes.
of
Yeah.
dads feel that way. Uh, um, Growing up, my parents got divorced when I was 12, and my mother got full custody of me. And my dad, but soon after, my mother moved away to Florida. We lived in Alabama. She moved to Florida, and I didn't want to go. And so she said, "We can go live with your dad, but he's still got to pay me child support." And so I lived with my dad. For my dad to get custody of me, he had to still pay my mom the $1,000 a month or whatever it was. And I lived with him. And he was a single dad who just really was kind of getting screwed by the system because it favored moms. And my mom just wasn't mentally healthy in the moment. And so she lived all through my high school years. She lived in Florida. My dad paid her child support while he supported me. So it was a very sad situation. And he went into a deep depression for a number of years, had a really, really, really tough time. But you're right. It is a huge problem. And my dad was very silent about it, never shared it with anyone. No one knew that about him. And my heart broke for him because there was no way I could help him, and the system wasn't set up for him to win.
So, and that's what we see. The fathers who come to us, even regardless of how difficult well, first off, and this isn't all mothers, of course, and most separated parents work things out. Okay, so I think that is the case more often than not. But there are countless situations where you have people making business decisions, like you're saying, and
Mhm.
men do what they need to do and do the kinds of things that your father did, right? He
Mhm.
basically had to buy her off, right? And I
Yeah.
don't mean to disparage your mother and say
Yeah. Yeah.
these are the things, the choices and decisions that we see routinely with the fathers who come to us. And I've yet to have a father. We've had over 100 fathers come to us. I've yet to have one that was overtly or unnecessarily disrespectful in the tone toward the mother, even when they were being raked over the coals. They still,
Yeah.
that number you're saying where the moms are feeling supported, that's what men do, right? That's what
Yeah.
we do. You know, we,
Yeah.
even under those circumstances, we're respectful towards mom, and we do what we can to be able to get through these situations to try to do what is best for the children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a number of situations from generations past that men are still living down, where the man was abusive, the man was neglecting. But each generation, something new comes about. And so that generation learned from those things, but we're still living it down. It's the court system still believe that they're better off with their moms. Well, in my situation, I was not better off with my mom. My mom made next to no money, and just really struggled. The reason they got divorced is because my sister passed away in a car accident.
Oh,
She was 15, I was 12. And so that trauma drove them apart, and my mom deteriorated mentally. But the court system never saw that. It was not a very conducive situation for my dad. But you're right. No, I think men go into it understanding they're going to be perceived as the aggressor in everything. And so I know men to this day who won't be in a room alone with a woman because they're afraid they're going to be accused of something. I've been taught by a number of men growing up, like, hey, watch what you say to women, watch what, like, be overly cautious, because we are living down some things from prior generations where it's been portrayed in the media. And it is rightfully so. I mean, these things have happened. It's kind of like, all the racial tension in the country. We're still living down past mistakes. The tension is rightfully there, but it does lead to some misaccusations where it's like, this person's not actually doing anything wrong, but because of the things that have happened in the past, they have to relive that. So I think that's what the data says, is like dads are still kind of living that down and going, look, I'm here. I'm not perfect, but I'm here and I want to be a part of it. And like, I get that I might not do things exactly the way you want it done, which was my parents' situation. My dad didn't do things the way my mom wanted it done. And so she left him, and she knew at the end of the day being a mother was like all she had. And so financially, frankly, I mean, it was like, you say business decisions, that's very much what it was. It was, my mom loved me, but at the same time, she didn't have any way to make a living outside of my dad paying her. And so when she wanted to move and I didn't, it became, okay, well, you can go live with your dad. That's what you want, but I'm not letting go of this money. So she kind of exploited the situation, and it's sad. I've seen that before, but I think there's an opportunity now for what you guys are doing to come in and to build guys up, build men up to be to where they can deal with that. And okay, what do you do now going forward in a country where we're ready to answer the call of fatherlessness, which is it's rampant. I mean, it's such a problem right now. But the only choice we have is to continue going forward and to make things better. And in the face of whatever it may be, legislatively or culturally, socially, we are the generation to make that better. Like, this is the time that it shifts so that our kids, I want fathers to be seen in movies and television as like the role model, the strong voice of peace in the home, not the chaotic idiot who's there and just screws things up, or the one who's flirting with other women when he's married. And like, I can't tell you how much that boils my blood, because that's not what men are like by and large. And I know you see that, but when we can change that narrative, and I think this generation is doing it, I think it'll start to shift in America.
We certainly face a challenge on our end with that, because the courts in particular are very intransigent on that. And there are silos. Every courtroom is a silo in and of itself. So if you're trying to change the perceptions, you can't, it's hard to just do it from a broad perspective, because that judge, that courtroom, they do things the way that they do things. Now, what I will say, we're part of a statewide group of fatherhood advocates here in Pennsylvania. And for 3+ years now, we've been trying to advance a piece of legislation to create a commission on greater father-family involvement in the state of Pennsylvania. We just, Monday of this week, the bill passed outside of the House, and now it's in the Senate. So, and what this commission will do is, it's a commission, what the bill is going to pass is a commission that then is going to spend about a year trying to figure out and do a report for the governor and the General Assembly, and possibly lay out the groundwork to create the commission that then will look at fatherhood throughout all of government, all the services, all the agencies, all the programs, and anything like that, and analyze how we can do better in engaging fathers, as well as what programs, evidence-based programs, can be utilized and put to use to be able to bring those fathers in who aren't upholding their sacred commitment as men to be fathers to their children. So we're making some gains at that level here in Pennsylvania to be able to do that.
I love it, man. That is fantastic. That's exactly what we need. We need the boots on the ground, things happening in courtrooms to move it forward. Because like I said, that this is the time. Like, I've never felt like there's more momentum around anything in my generation as this. And maybe because I've just talked to so many men, but like, everyone agrees it's time to move this. And women are in agreement with this as well. Pretty much all the women, all the mothers I've talked to have said, no, fathers need more rights in these situations. They need to be looked at differently, because that's not an accurate portrayal of who they are. I know in Mississippi, where the custody battle took place for my sister, there's a long backstory to how my sister passed away. She was my stepsister, and her father lived in Mississippi. The mother was given preferential treatment in any situation, and I think that's probably the case in Alabama as well. And there's really not any rhyme or reason. I mean, I'm sure there were originally some rhyme or reason to why that was, but it was as if the dad, and in Alabama, in the custody battle for me, the dad had to prove himself. My dad had to prove himself. And my dad was a 6-figure income earner, had raised me my entire life, had no record at all, and they still gave my mother full custody. My mother made $10,000 a year. She made 10% of what my dad made. had mental health issues in the past, had every reason to not send me to my mom. But what happened was my dad ultimately felt guilty and felt like he couldn't fight back, like he didn't need to fight back. And so that's going back to that, feeling like their spouse supports them. 83% of women say that. My dad's role, he thought his role was to submit and to just, I need to be run over. And I think it's a passivity that a lot of men have inherited, to go, whatever she wants, whatever will make her stop, I'll just give her that. And in that instance, it actually ended up hurting me. And this is nothing against my dad, but him being passive sent me to a situation that wasn't the best. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't the best. And then I'm thankful to God that my mother decided to leave, because I ended up going back to my dad. And then me and my mom reunited years later after she had gotten healthy. But the court should have helped with that. There should have been more visibility to not just give a mother preferential treatment just because she's a mother. My mom's great in her own ways, but in that situation, my dad was more equipped mentally, financially, physically, with his house. Like, his house was in the community that I grew up in. So anyways, I have a lot of feelings about that, but I thank you guys for the work you're doing, because it's so needed. And I think everyone's hungry for it.
So a couple of points. First off, this is something that I've recognized and I talk about. Fathers are deferential to the mothers, right? In the manner in which you're saying. Fathers also are very often, in the face of understanding the conflict and the turmoil, defer, because they know it's almost assuredly a losing battle, and they don't want it, that all of that negativity and all to impact the children. So it's a
Yeah.
sacrifice, but like you said, it might not be for the benefit of the children, but these are the decisions and the mindsets that men have, in addition to lawyers telling them, oh, you're not going to win, those sorts of. But the other
Yeah.
thing I will say about the bill, to come back to that and to your point, it passed unanimously out of committee, and it passed unanimously out of the House. Democrats and Republican in the year 2022, we don't
Wow.
agree on nothing. It passed absolutely unanimously, and men and women, right? So, like you're
Yeah.
saying, there's a broad recognition, but it's the silos of these systems and the courts, the county offices, and those kinds of things that we need to start doing things to be able to really impact at the delivery level how the processes that occurred for you years ago are still occurring, to be able to help the children in today, because it's still that's the state of play far
Mm,
too often, even now. So
yeah. And I was reading this one example that was saying the child. So a lot of times children, I know in Mississippi it was 15. I don't know what the age is in Alabama, but they get preference, or they can speak into it, and they can choose
okay,
the parent. Um, well, in this example, the child chose. This was Alabama. Child. The judge awarded custody to the mother, because even though the child chose the father, an expert witness said they'd be better off psychologically with the mother. So a lot of times you get that. So yeah, there are just a lot of, and I think dads hear that and see that, and they go, you need to settle. You need to work with the mom, let her have the custody. You get the kids every other weekend, and you pay the child support, because otherwise she'll get full custody and you won't see him again. It's a fear-based passivity that honestly is hurting kids, not because moms oftentimes are working on their motherly instinct, and they're trying to. I know my mom thought it was in my best interest for her to have me. And then when she had the decision that it probably wasn't, she, manipulated the situation. But I think mothers assume, hey, you're not taking my child from me. And I think that's where dads go, I'm not fighting mama bear. I'm just gonna lay down. But a lot of, I think what you guys are probably doing, a lot of what men need to know is they have rights, they have options other than just laying down or taking full custody. And you have a right as a father to be there for your children. It's not optional. Fatherhood is not optional. And I think for a lot of generations, it's felt like the dad provides, and that's really it. And it's what if I'm providing, then I'm still a good dad, because yeah, they're living with their mom, and yeah, they got this stepdad guy in their lives, but I'm over here providing, and so that's good enough. That is not what fatherhood is about. That's a portion of it, but study after study after study after study show that having a true father influence, not to say a stepdad can't step in and do that, they certainly can, but a lot of times they don't, and they don't fill the shoes that their father, and even if they do, there's this psychological gap missing. My wife's dad left them very early on. She grew up with a stepdad. Her stepdad became her dad, but there's still psychological wounds from her dad not being, her biological father not being in her life. There's always this thing in her mind going, why? And he could have been completely justified. But for dads out there, what I want them to hear is that you have an, I would call it an obligation, but it's really an opportunity to be a father, even if you think the financial aspect is enough, it's not. They need your heart more than they need your money. And you need to fight. Like, if it might be easier to get out of that situation like my dad did, but generations to come will thank you if you stay in the fight and keep pushing for what's rightfully yours, is to be a father. Now that may look different for dad. Doesn't mean you need to push the mom out of the picture, but I think there's something in the middle where you can be the dad. Again, your kids need your heart. And so I'm very passionate about that, because I've seen my wife walk through counseling and walk through the problems that have come with her biological father not being there. So it's so important that they continue to fight for that.
And I do, before you got to go, I want to get to Uvalde because I want to have that discussion with you. But I want
Mhm.
to relay a story we went through November of last year through March of this year. A father came to us who he lived in South Carolina, and the mother had taken their 9-year-old son. He was 9 at the time. I think he's 11 now. So it was 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, and came up to
Mhm.
Pennsylvania. Whatever had happened, that the boy had ended up in custody and care of the Office of Children and Youth in one of our counties. Now, the
Mhm.
father was a very humble man, very kind hearted, a good soul, right? But a humble person who had been raised in Detroit and came to South Carolina because he just wanted to find his own way in life. He'd worked 18 years at the same place, a barbecue restaurant, right?
Mhm.
When all of this happened, he didn't know what to happen. And the system was so much bigger than him. And
Mhm.
so they didn't come to him through other relatives. He got pulled into what had happened with his son being in Pennsylvania. And they were doing, they never really gave him the opportunity to have custody of his child. He was doing visits for a while, whatever happened. Um, and there was a gap of time that he wasn't involved. And so they proceeded to go for termination of rights. Now, the mom's mom, the maternal grandmother, is actually who reached out to us because her hair was on fire. She's like, and they also had shut her out. Like they completely shut the maternal grandmother out. And so she came to us and said, help me work with this father so that he can get custody. And we fought tooth and nail. And there was no accusation, not even the implication of any kind of abuse or harm that was done by either the grandmother or the father toward the boy. But he had been placed in foster care, and they had determined, they had made their minds up based on the chaotic way that the mother had operated and that the father wasn't as, I guess, assertive about all of these
Mhm.
things, that they were going to take custody. And we went into court, we fought it. But at the end of the day, they terminated his rights because they could. That's basically what they said in court, right? They didn't say it was anything about him, except one of the, there were 4 attorneys, the county attorney, a guardian ad litem for the child, an advocate who's an attorney for the child, and an attorney for the mother who had absolutely disappeared. Even mom's mom didn't know where mom was, but they had to
Mhm.
have an attorney representing her in the courtroom. All 4 of them, including that attorney, were like, we need to terminate rights. They like fought tooth and nail to terminate his rights. And one of them said, oh, well, he picked his job over his kid, which was just mind blowing. But and the thing I tried to drive home, because I was able to testify, is what is the impact going to be for this boy moving forward? And what are you telling him? Are you telling him, well, we're terminating the rights of your father based on a technicality? Or are you just letting the boy believe his father didn't want to be in his life and that his grandmother didn't want to be in his life? And the judge went along with it. Like he was, he scolded the father, you didn't do what you could have done, and they terminated his rights. And that's just one of the most horrible. We deal with a lot of horrible situations, but that's the way the system can just become so entrenched and so myopic. And we kind of made a deal about it. We publicized it a little bit, which just, they were going to do what they were going to do regardless, but it made them meaner about it, because we drew light to it and then, whatever. So
That is absolutely awful. I have a friend who grew up in the foster system, and he recently actually just received a scholarship from prior First Lady Melania Trump, and so he has a very, very interesting story, powerful story. But growing up in the foster system is never the best thing for a child. I mean, barring some sort of abuse or neglect or horrible, like if the dad's just might not be the best dad on earth, like every dad on earth is, and he's flawed, that's always better than the foster system. The stories he tells. Now, some foster organizations, some foster stories are great, but some are not great. And so you're taking that gamble. He had two situations, one where he grew up in a house that was based, or in a house with 18 other kids. It was basically like prison, and traumatized him for life. And then he moved to another house where he was loved for, and loved and cared for. And but when I hear that, I'm so sad, because we're putting another kid into a foster system to feel unwanted and unloved, potentially put into a governmental program, a bureaucratic program where they're going to be overlooked and treated like a number, all because a man didn't live up to the standard you had, and when a man wanted to be in his life. And that's such a tragedy. That's absolutely awful. So the kid ended up being in the foster system.
yeah, and he no rights. He can't contact them or anything. And to your point, I'm assuming they're good people and that they will try to do their best by the child. But he's on medication. He's got a number of people working with him, and therapists and counselors. Talking to the dad, that the dad's like, he didn't have all these when he was in South Carolina, and they terminated the visits because he would act out after the visits, right? And I'm like, what do no? Well, yeah, he's going to act out after the visits. Of course he is. But they blame it on something about the father. So that's why they stopped the visits for him and the grandmother. But it doesn't, even if they treat him well, he's still going to have that whole, you know what I mean? The rejection is the presumption of the rejection by his mother and his family. That's going to be something that's going to impact him for the remainder of his life. There's just no getting around that.
Yeah. Well, and so pivoting, to the effect of fatherlessness, like when I hear that, I'm so sad, because the data, and I'm sure everyone knows the data, but I mean, 1 in 4 kids live without a father in the home in America, which is absolutely mind blowing. How in the world are we at that point? Kids are 4 times greater risk of living in poverty. There's all these statistics around. They're more likely to go to prison, more likely to become pregnant as a teen. They're more likely to face abuse and neglect. And it's like all of the data is there. It's laid out everywhere. And yet we have school shootings where, I was reading something in our conversation. This was from Brad Wilcox. This is on aei.org. But he was referencing a study where, see if I can find it. It says, after the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, scholar Brad Wilcox called attention to the work of criminologists, it names the criminologist, where they found the absence of fathers is the most powerful predictor of crimes. He explained that fathers are role models for their sons who maintain authority and discipline, thereby helping develop self-control and empathy towards others. Like, this is a no-brainer. And it said among the 25 most cited school shooters since Columbine, 75% were reared in broken homes. The connection is undeniable. but it's not a problem that's easily solved. And so we don't want to go after it because gun control, and this, not to get political, but gun control is a much easier thing to go after. It's a Band-Aid. And I don't doubt that gun control would limit. I mean, when you look at the numbers of school shootings in America versus all over the world, it's undeniable. I think it's like 288 versus like the next, number two in the world is like 5 shooting, So I get that it's a problem, the access to guns, but I also think it's a Band-Aid on the mental health, the aggression, the misplaced anger, the brokenness, the loneliness. Those things don't go away because there's not a gun there. And so we can certainly do that. We can certainly limit gun access, but how do we start to heal the next generation? How do we start to give people, how do we start to have healthy communities? And when you look at the data, that clearly points to the fact that men need a stronger role in the family. They don't have to be perfect. They just need to be there. They need to be present. They need to be connected. They quote Tupac Shakur, who is a late rapper, but he was involved in gangs and he was murdered in 1996. So he had a rough life and he was in his 20s when he died. But he's quoted as saying he knew for a matter of a fact that if he had a father, he would have discipline. He would have confidence because he turned to gangs. You hear this story over and over again where young boys, male and female, turn to gangs as a source of community because they don't feel like they belong. And their mothers, frankly, are so pushed to the limit already in what they're expected to do. When they're pushed to raise a child in a way they were never intended by God to raise a child, to be the man and the woman, to be a male voice, to raise a man, it's no wonder why men grow up like abusing women because they don't know what it means to respect a woman. They've never been taught the other side of being raised. It's just they have an issue with their mom now because they're bitter towards them. It just causes so much dysfunction, because you start to wonder, did my mom cause my dad to leave? Did my mom do this? Why did my mom push him away? So things spiral out of control without men taking their role in leadership. And listen, the gun control and the school shootings, it's a symptom of a much, much bigger problem. And I think mental health plays into it. But if you dig deeper, I really do think that the lack of mentorship, the lack of a male figure being in there, it doesn't even have to be a father necessarily. I know people who were raised by their stepdads, and there was a mental disconnect from, why did my biological father leave? But they still had the discipline. My wife's a prime example, very disciplined, very confident woman. She still deals with wounds from her father leaving, but she's very capable in this world and she's a functioning adult in this world because she had a stepfather step in. But like I said, it's not easy. It's not an easy solution. It's a very, very, very difficult solution to say, hey, the solution to this is to stay in there and connect and to be vulnerable and to be emotional and to share with your children when you're not. One of the things I put that I talk about is the best way to raise courageous kids is to let them see their parents be scared. And so for a father, when he feels inadequate, he is at his biggest, greatest opportunity to teach his kids to be courageous. When he feels at his weakest and I can't contribute, I don't know what I'm doing here. Well, that's great because now your kids get to see you be vulnerable, and that will change them for the rest of their lives because they see their dad be vulnerable and they know what it means to process an emotion and not run away from it. And so when they get emotional over school bullying or over loneliness or depression or anger, they don't lash out by attacking the people around them. They've seen what it looks like. You don't have to be perfect. I go to my kids and I say, like, I've lashed out at just being vulnerable. I've lashed out at my kids in anger. I've yelled at them. And a few minutes later, I've learned, I go back to them. I say, hey, I should not have yelled at you. You do not deserve to be yelled at. I'm sorry. I'm learning. God is like teaching me things every single day about myself. And I struggle. I struggle with insecurity. Like I say this to my 8 and 6-year-old kids. And I tell them I struggle with insecurity sometimes. I struggle with doubt. And I'm afraid that I'm not going to be a good dad. And they're like, why would you think, it's deep, that's heavy for an 8-year-old, but you'd be surprised what they pick up on, what they hear. I believe that my kids respect me more for that than like going in the other room and, you know, just stuffing it all. They've only got to see me be strong. I believe once we get to the point where we believe in it's okay to be a broken dad, and like just let that be okay with your kids. Let them see you deal with anger. Let them see you be present when you feel like you need to leave and go have a drink somewhere because you're just not in the mood to do it. That, I would say, that's your most powerful moment to teach them about processing anger, and then maybe these numbers start going down.
I know you were talking about this a little bit. I was tough on my mom. Like
Mm,
I was angry at her, and I just knew I was angry at her, and she got
mhm.
on my nerves for different reasons. But boy, and looking back on it, you know, that not knowing my situation with my father, like I didn't pursue that ever. And she had told me a couple of different stories, but I think looking back, that's why I was angry to her. And it was only after, and it took me a while to get going, but it was only after I got settled and started to become a man and got married and had a family and was doing okay in life that I found patience and grace toward my mother. And I was glad that I was able to get to that point before she passed. Um, but one thing I say often, honestly, the best thing you can do for moms and motherhood is to emphasize fatherhood and fathers. Because, like you
Yeah.
said, it's, they got a lot in their plate to begin with. And it's a two-person job. I say this all the time. They're 24 hours in the day. If your kid or kids sleep 8 hours, that leaves two 8-hour shifts. So
Mhm.
you need both the parents tapping in and out just from that perspective. But moms and dads, they give different things to their children. And in our household, there are things I give to my girls that mom can't give to them, and there are things mom gives to the girls that I can't give to them. And they need
Yeah.
all of that, to be able to grow and develop and have the best chance of being successful in life.
Yeah, man, that's exactly how I felt towards my mom when all of that transpired with my dad when they got divorced. All of the blame went to my mom, all of it, and some of it rightfully so. My dad wasn't perfect. Don't get me wrong. My dad wasn't a saint through all that. He had his issues, and there were good. There were good reasons for them to split up, I guess, if there ever can be. But I was very mad at her through that process, and blamed it all on her when in reality it wasn't fair necessarily. Um, but yeah, I think, and what it does is it creates, you have this lack of control, and so you feel like, I'm not gonna let anyone hurt me. This is like deeply psychological. I studied psychology in college, and I'm fascinated by this. But when you're hurt, your tendency is to be afraid of being hurt. And so when we're afraid, we try to control things. Control is really a mechanism of fear. You're trying to not be hurt. And so control comes out as anger. So what happens is you're hurt by your father leaving, and somehow you turn it to your mom. Well, now every woman going forward, kind of, you have that same pain rolled over in every relationship, and it's hard for you to connect with your wife now because your dad left you, because you placed the blame on your mom, and now you don't want to be hurt by anything. So your guard's up with your wife. It's such a snowball of emotional junk. Um, when, yeah, you're right. Mothers don't deserve that kind of weight put on them. I've dealt with all kinds of stuff with my wife, and I'm like, oh my God, I am treating you as if you're my mom and you hurt me when I was 12, and I've thought about that in my mind and thought this is not right. Um, but yeah, I honestly believe that, like, that is the number one reason for deterioration in our mental health, is because we feel rejected and we feel out of control. Because I really believe, and I'm not against tech. I mean, I'm a millennial. I'm not against technology, but I really believe that when and transportation, when they were modernized, men now have more opportunities to check out than ever before. And so now you've got a generation. Well, I think probably the risk of this generation is that their kids will feel what you and I have experienced, is their dads will check out emotionally, And now you have dads have more opportunities to leave and do something else than ever before, whether it be just check out on social media or physically check out because they can just, go wherever. And it's a huge risk because it's just pain snowball generation after generation. And you see these, it starts with one guy making one decision to not be there for his family, and then that pain rolls over, and it's a generational thing that will take several generations to undo. But all it takes is one guy to decide, I'm going to stop this. It's one man, and that's what blows my mind. I was a part of a men's movement at a church we were at before, and I started hearing stories from guys, and the sense of helplessness that permeates throughout this generation of men is unbelievable. It's as if there's nothing I can do. And so they self-medicate with social media. They self-medicate with cheating on their wife. They self-medicate with alcohol. And sometimes it's not that drastic. It's just, I'm just emotionally not available. I'm not there. And I think the message that I'm trying to get across is it can literally stop with you. All you have to do is be emotionally available for your kids right now. And frankly, it doesn't even take, it takes like a span of a few years. I mean, most problems, I deal with 6-year-old problems. And what you probably deal with, like, there's a span, I think, from 5 to like 12 where your mind is most malleable, and you're shaped as a human being in those span of years. Just be present during the most valuable year, like, and it blows my mind. I'm like, man, the opportunity in front of you. Yes, the pain is great and the country's hurting, but the opportunity in front of us is like, it's ripe right now. Kids are so hungry for connection. When I coach youth sports, those kids treat me like I'm their dad, and I met them at one practice. So as a father, the bar is not as high as you think it is, and you're way above that bar. I promise. There aren't many guys that are as bad as they think they are. Again, going back to the data, dads tend to think they're failing pretty much. They think I'm not as good of a dad as I should be. It says only 37% of dads feel like they spend an adequate amount of time with their kids, when that's just simply not true when we look at the data of the amount of time they spend with their kids. Only 39% of dads think they're doing a very good job as a parent, as opposed to over 50% of moms. So I think for me, and I know it's a big, long roundabout way of getting back to school shootings and really just aggression in the country as a whole. I think if dads would realize that it doesn't take what they think it takes, it doesn't take a big mental health revival in the country. It takes a broken man being willing to be open to his children. You don't have to fix yourself. Like that to me was the mindset shift as a dad, is I don't have to go read a bunch of self-help books and figure out how to become a better dad. I just need to be emotionally available. Like, personal growth is a big part of becoming a better person, but your kids they need vulnerability. They need humility. They need you to be there. They need you to be at their game, watching, genuinely watching, not on your phone. When they bring you a picture, they want, like my kids, I'll tell them if their picture sucks, but I'll tell them in a nice way. And they need to know I pay attention and I care. And I go, man, I love this, but what is that? And they'll go, well, that's a so-and-so. I'll be like, oh, that doesn't look like a so-and-so, that to them means so much. And they tell, I'll find out in years to come, but I know that they miss me when I'm gone. And that means the world to me. I know that when they do drawings, I'm in the picture and they put best dad ever on their, and it's not because I build them up and not because I'm a great dad. I'm just there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, like on just being available and being
Well,
there to connect.
I guess my thought, the point you're making is, for these people, for the fathers who are hesitant in some way, you need to just jump in the deep end and figure out how to swim, is what you're
Yeah.
saying, right? With an open
Yeah.
heart, and just, what I mean?
Yeah.
Just dive in and do it. I'll give you an
Because
example.
we're all on the deep end.
I'll get what your point you're making. I've actually, now my youngest daughter is 16, my oldest is 18. The oldest one has special needs. But the 16-year-old, like the last year or two, I've been less present because I just have so many responsibilities going on. And so I'm becoming more aware of that because there's some distancing in our relationship. And so I had noticed she brought this project back from school where it was a brown grocery bag around an empty box of cereal, and it had a picture of the guy who ran the Manhattan Project, and it was Munchies or Bunchies, something, Manhattan Munchies, and that was the name of the cereal. And so I started looking at it, and her class project was to take something from World War II and design it into a cereal and do all of this stuff. And so it had been sitting on the dining room table for a day or two. She had left to go to school, and I'm like, I got to text her. And I texted her that I wanted some of those Manhattan Munchies, but I was disappointed that it's empty, just to let her know I was in on the joke. But
Yeah.
just as I'm doing that, I had a crazy busy morning, and my needs kid and I'm just trying to type this. I just wanted to
Yeah.
send this one type to my youngest daughter just to do that one thing because I know I haven't, and that's what you got to do as fathers. You got to.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's okay to be absent for a time. I really do. I've had times where I was really busy with work and I just wasn't available for a while. So I do think the notion that you're talking about, a lot of men feel guilty because I know where I'm from, there's a lot of plant work. And so they'll have a shutdown period where for 90 days they work ungodly hours. I think that's perfectly fine. I think your kids need to see you be hungry and pushing forward and not. So one thing my dad did that I learned from was he pretty much sacrificed his career, career ambitions. He worked at the same job for 50 years, and thank God he provided for us. But I think the next level of that for me is my kids need to see me be hungry for something more than what we currently have. So I think that's fantastic. It's a great story of like they need to see you pursuing friendships, pursuing career, living your life. I just came from a conference where there was a mental health expert, a Dr. John Deloney, who was talking about the best thing for your kids is for you to be emotionally healthy. And so if that is having a job, then have the job. Like if that's having friends and having a guys night, have the guys night. Don't feel guilty about that. Don't feel ashamed. But like you said, there's that balance of as long as they know they have your heart. There was another study, I wish I could cite it now, but it showed that time is not necessarily all the same. So spending more time with your kids is not as important as being present, even for the time that you're there. Sending that message would have sent a lot more to your daughter than you guys sitting in the same room for 3 hours while she plays on her phone. Because that tells her I'm important, I'm valuable. My dad took a minute out of his day when he didn't have to. I would even say it's more important than setting up like every Thursday night we play games. Not that that's not important, but that's kind of feels like, okay, you set this aside, you kind of have to do it, as opposed to like, at one time I went and just checked my kids out of school on a Friday afternoon and they didn't know I was coming. I just checked them out and was like, what do you guys want to do? And they're like, I don't know. I was like, well, I took the rest of the day off because I want to be with you. And whatever you want to do, I want to do that. If you want to go to the park, and so I believe in those little moments. I believe in those little moments of just being there, being present, but don't feel guilty for going and working for a period of time either.
All right, man. I think we got to start wrapping up soon here, Mike. My daughter's actually gonna be coming in my oldest from school here in a minute or two. So,
Yeah.
man, incredible conversation. Wow, thank you very much. And again, your website is just really, really incredible. Content's really incredible. Maybe we can kind of continue these conversations moving forward because I think this was just really high level. So.
Yeah. Jeff, thank you. The work you're doing, going through your website, looking at some of the stuff you've done, what you've described to me, it is so needed. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have the conversation with you. And yeah, I agree. Let's keep talking. Let's keep pushing this forward and getting the word out there.
All right, my friend. Um, we'll we'll get the video pulled together. We'll give you the information in the video so that you have it when we get it pulled together.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get the opportunity to be able to talk again.
Yeah, that sounds great. Again, I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Let me stop record real quick here.
Okay.